Thomas Hobbes is often remembered as the man who stared into the dark corners of human nature and had the courage to describe what he saw. Born in 1588 in England, during a time of political upheaval and religious conflict, Hobbes entered the world as the Spanish Armada sailed toward English shores. He once claimed that fear and himself were born twins, a statement that would define not just his personality but also his entire philosophy of politics and human life. Hobbes was not a gentle optimist about the human spirit. Instead, he looked at the world with sharp realism, convinced that the forces of fear and the hunger for power shape every society. To understand Hobbes is to understand how modern political philosophy began and why we still live in the shadow of his ideas whenever we talk about government, order, and authority. Hobbes grew up during an era of civil wars, plague, and the collapse of long-standing institutions. England in the 17th century was fractured by the conflict between monarchy and parliament, as well as by the tensions between Catholics and Protestants. Violence was common, and the security of daily life was uncertain. For Hobbes, these events were not just background noise, they were proof that humanity, when left to itself, tends to chaos. This belief would form the foundation of his most famous work, Leviathan, a book that still shapes the way we think about power and the state. But Hobbes was more than a political thinker. He was a keen observer of human psychology, a man who believed that to build a stable government, one must first understand the passions, fears, and ambitions that drive people. Hobbes began his intellectual journey as a scholar of classics, translating ancient Greek texts into English. He had a sharp mind and a restless curiosity, drawn to mathematics, physics, and philosophy. His travels across Europe exposed him to some of the greatest thinkers of his time, including Galileo Galilei, whose scientific methods influenced Hobbes's own approach to politics. Hobbes came to believe that just as nature follows predictable laws, human societies too can be studied scientifically. The task of a philosopher, in his eyes, was to identify the natural laws that govern human behavior and then use them to design a political system strong enough to maintain peace. To Hobbes, philosophy was not an abstract pursuit, it was a practical tool to solve humanity's most pressing problem, how to prevent life from descending into conflict and fear. The heart of Hobbes's philosophy lies in his description of the state of nature. He asked his readers to imagine a world without government, without kings, without laws, and without any authority to restrain individuals. What would life be like in such a condition? Hobbes's answer was bleak. In the state of nature, he argued, humans would live in a constant state of competition, mistrust, and insecurity. Everyone would fear everyone else because there would be no common power to keep them in check. Each person, driven by the instinct of self-preservation, would do whatever it takes to survive, even if it meant harming others. This grim vision led to his most famous line, "Life in the state of nature would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." These words capture Hobbes's belief that without a strong authority, human society collapses into violence and fear. Yet Hobbes did not think humans were inherently evil. Instead, he saw them as rational beings who seek to avoid pain and secure their own survival. It was precisely this rational fear of death and chaos that, according to Hobbes, would drive individuals to form societies. People agree to give up some of their natural freedom in exchange for protection and order. This agreement, or social contract, is at the core of Hobbes's political theory. By uniting under a common authority, individuals escape the dangers of the state of nature and create a civil society where laws and peace can prevail. For Hobbes, this was not just a historical story about how governments might have formed, it was a logical argument about why governments are necessary. Hobbes believed that the authority created by the social contract had to be absolute. Once people surrendered their natural rights to the state, they could not take them back. The power of the sovereign, be it a king, a parliament, or any ruling body, had to be unquestioned and indivisible. Only such a powerful authority could keep the peace and prevent society from sliding back into chaos. This idea of an all-powerful state, symbolized by the giant figure of the Leviathan on the cover of his book, was Hobbes's solution to the problem of disorder. To many of his contemporaries, this sounded like a defense of tyranny, but to Hobbes, it was a defense of peace. In his mind, the worst tyrant was still better than the anarchy of the state of nature. The religious debates of Hobbes's time also shaped his philosophy. Europe was still reeling from centuries of religious wars, and Hobbes believed that the intertwining of religious authority with politics was a dangerous source of conflict. He argued that the sovereign power should also control religious matters to prevent division and strife. This was a radical idea in an age when church leaders often held as much power as kings. Hobbes's insistence on a single, supreme authority that governed both civil and religious life was part of his larger mission to eliminate the sources of civil war. He wanted to place peace and stability above all other considerations. Hobbes's realism about human nature was controversial. Many religious and political leaders were outraged by his rejection of divine rights and his view that moral rules were not absolute truths but rather agreements made by humans to keep society functioning. Hobbes believed that good and evil were defined by the laws of the state, not by some higher cosmic order. This secular approach to politics was shocking in a world where kings claimed to rule by the will of God. Yet it also made Hobbes one of the pioneers of modern political thought, laying the groundwork for later secular governments that separated religion from state affairs. Despite the criticism he faced, Hobbes's ideas endured because they addressed a fundamental truth about human societies: the need for order. His vision of an all-powerful sovereign may not appeal to our modern democratic values, but his underlying question, how do we prevent society from collapsing into conflict, remains as urgent as ever. In times of war, political turmoil, or even natural disasters, we see how fragile order can be and how quickly fear can drive people to demand strong leaders who promise security. Hobbes helps us understand why this happens and reminds us that freedom and peace often depend on the existence of authority and laws. The influence of Hobbes extends far beyond his own era. Thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau would later challenge his ideas, offering more optimistic views of human nature and advocating for limited government and individual rights. Yet even in disagreeing with Hobbes, they were building on the foundation he laid. Modern political science, with its focus on power dynamics, state sovereignty, and the rule of law, owes much to Hobbes's pioneering work. His notion that governments are formed by human agreements rather than divine decree marked a turning point in Western political philosophy. Reading Hobbes today, we might find his vision harsh or overly pessimistic, but his insights remain relevant in a world where nations still struggle with conflict, distrust, and the balance between freedom and security. His belief that fear is a powerful motivator in politics can be seen in the way leaders often use the promise of protection to gain or maintain power. Hobbes reminds us that the stability we enjoy is not something to take for granted. It is built on the fragile cooperation of individuals agreeing to follow rules and submit to authority. Hobbes's personal life reflects his philosophical outlook. Known for his cautious nature, he lived through the English Civil War and spent years in exile in France to escape political persecution. He remained deeply skeptical of human intentions and valued the safety that came from strong governance. His longevity, he lived into his 90s, allowed him to witness the rise and fall of regimes, reinforcing his belief that political stability was the key to human flourishing. What makes Hobbes's work fascinating even today is its raw honesty about human motivations. he did not cloak his theories in idealism or moralistic aspirations. Instead, he faced the darker truths of our nature head-on, convinced that acknowledging them was the first step to building a lasting peace. Hobbes forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Are we truly free, or are we always driven by fear and the desire for security? Can humans be trusted to govern themselves without descending into conflict? These questions continue to echo in debates about government power, individual liberty, and the responsibilities of citizens. Thomas Hobbes gave us a language to discuss these dilemmas. His concept of the social contract reshaped political discourse, influencing not only philosophers but also the development of constitutions and modern legal frameworks. He showed that politics is not merely about kings or parliaments but about the underlying relationships between people and the authority they create. By analyzing power as a human construct rather than a divine gift, Hobbes opened the door for the rational study of government, laying the foundation for political science as we know it. Ultimately, Hobbes's legacy is both a warning and a guide. He warns us that beneath the veneer of civilization lies the potential for conflict and violence, always waiting to resurface if the structures of authority crumble. At the same time, he guides us by offering a framework for building strong institutions that can preserve peace and protect us from the worst aspects of our own nature. His vision may be somber, but it is also profoundly practical, grounded in the reality of human experience. Thomas Hobbes was a man shaped by fear, but he transformed that fear into wisdom. He looked at the chaos of his time and sought a solution that would bring order to human life. In doing so, he became one of the architects of the modern state, reminding us that power, when guided by reason and directed toward peace, can be a force for stability rather than oppression. His story is a testament to the power of philosophy to confront the most pressing challenges of society, and it continues to inspire reflection on how we can build a world where fear does not rule us but instead drives us to create systems that safeguard peace and security for all.